in my free time it's playing an RPG, it's so much like work. Like there's number crunching and stat crunching, and I'm obsessed with that. And like it's bad. Like it's at the expense of story. Like in Skyrim, which just came out, well, not really just came out, but like when Skyrim came out, I wanted to do all the story stuff, but I found myself like number crunching my character immediately. So I was like, I've got to save the world from dragons, but first I have to smith 100 daggers to max out my character statistics, right? Like, it's like not good priorities. I have my video games run into my movies, and they kind of bleed over with like the NES games lined up, SNES games, the actual Super Famicom games that I can't read, and then like all the PSX and beyond, and then there's like various things below there, like really obscure stuff. There's a Neo Geo Pocket Color, which I only have like one game for because there's only one good game on it, and so that's where all my video games are. I mean, the first animated film that I ever made was called The Dismissal of Mario. It was for an art history class. You do like a creative project, and that's when I first like tried animation. And the film is Mario of the Mario series arriving at the castle, being told by Toad that the prince is in another castle, and having this like German expressionist type mental breakdown. So from the very start with animation, it's always had nods to video games. And the reason I think I mix the narratives of my films with the narratives of the video games I grew up with is that is my cultural reference point, right? Like those are the experiences that I grew up with. But like for me, growing up saturated by media, everything like that's the most important part of my life, which is sad to say, but true. And so like, and video games are so experiential and so immersive. It's not just like, it's not like a good game of chess you play. Like it's not like a game in that sense. Like it's like a lived experience. It's like something that I am nostalgic for living through. And so drawing on those experiences and nodding to those experiences like affectionately and sometimes critically is just it's just what any writer would do with their past.
Oh, you seem really distracted today. I can't believe a floor slime almost got a hit in.
I think you've got these like little elements, like so shaky chairs or like 3D, right? But those are not meaningful interactions with the experience. And I think that is where movies will never be able to do what video games can do. The choices you make in terms of what, like when you press a button, when you move a certain direction, affect whether that character in that story lives or dies. You are actually, your hands are in that narrative experience, moving things around. So I think the people who are pushing 3D as immersive or like vibrating chairs as immersive are people who don't understand video games and who don't understand why people love them. Because I don't love video games because the controller shakes in my hand. Like that's not what I love. I love being able to make meaningful decisions in a video game, or in a narrative environment. And until, like, because movies can't do that, movies will never cross that threshold. Like, I think the incorporation of video game elements into movies is kind of a new thing. I mean, Scott Pilgrim blazed a trail in that in terms of using text in a really heavy way, which like anime has been doing for years in terms of incorporating manga into itself. But like Scott Pilgrim used video game fonts and text and used text in a really interesting way. And I think one of the biggest ways to sort of nod to video games structurally in terms of the viewing experience is to label things with text, because you experience video games so much through like textual interface. Yeah, the first time I ever heard about Final Fantasy VII was because I think like video games are these really powerful shared experiences in some ways. Like it's this like you live it as though it's your own life when you play it, but it's your own. It's shared with the people around you. And so when I was a kid, the first time I heard of Final Fantasy VII, I was on a playground, and it was kindergarten, and some kid named Jared was describing to me this guy named Cloud Strife. And like that's all I knew was like his name and that he had blonde hair and a giant sword, and like that was already the coolest thing I'd ever heard of. He was in some game called Final Fantasy VII, and I didn't see screenshots. Like the best way for a video game to be described to you is by like a little kid who's excited about that game, you know. And so like in my head I was like, who is this guy? The cover of the game is like him turned around, so like the mystery continues. Like what does this guy look like? So yeah, my first experiences with the game were like steeped in like this like legend. if you look at Japanese video games in general, there's a much stronger focus on a stricter, straightforward narrative in which you're a participant, but you can't really change the outcome, which again is a very general rule. And then in the West, there's again generally an emphasis on games in which you can affect the outcome, and there's much more exploration and customization. I don't want to say creativity. There are definitely video game creative types who are trying to recreate movie experiences. I think that's just as bad as, or at least as problematic, as filmmakers trying to recreate video game, not nod to, but actually recreate video game experiences, because the mediums are so different. It's not tapping into the full potential of the medium. And so I do think that impulse is getting even bigger as as the budgets are expanding and as companies are trying to bank on safer and safer things. Making your game feel like a movie is a way to theoretically increase the selling power of your game. So I do think that feedback happens the other way, and I think it's just as bad. You have cutscene sequences that are like 20 minutes. Like that's not a video game. Like it's like, okay, let me just like put the controller down and chill for a minute because I'm not really playing a video game right now. You can still create a meaningful narrative. Like I don't want to say the same way that like films that use 3D aren't necessarily bad. I just think that they could be better if they tap more into what the medium can do. So Roger Ebert on video games is art. I think Ebert is wrong. Like start with that. I read the article and he mentioned that like one of his like younger friends gave him a video game to play as like to see if he liked it, and the video game was like a Simpsons racing game, and he was like, that's not art. And I was like, yeah, but if the only movie you've ever seen is like, I don't know, like Geely, you're not gonna think film is art. You're gonna be like, that's bullshit. You ask people whether video games are art, and they have this gut instinct that the answer is no for whatever reason, and then they don't want to just say, I don't feel like that's true. They want to rationalize it. So you find people coming up with these really weird random definitions of art that they've never used before. Like, oh, art has to have, like, art can't have interactivity. When has that ever been true? Like, when has it ever been true that you can't interact with a painting or you can't interact with a book by like the act of reading it aloud to a family member is a way of interacting with the book, right? So like, people come up with these definitions because they are just trying to like backtrack to whatever their ignorant belief is, which is like, this can't be art. And like, I wouldn't say all video games are art the same way that I wouldn't say all films or TV shows or books are art. But if like, show me anyone who has played like Eco or Katamari Damacy or a Final Fantasy game, and then who says like video games are incapable of being emotional experiences, and like I will give you like a grade A bullshitter, because that's just not true. Like it's not as though we're in the first 4 years of video game development and people are like, maybe this could be used for art. Like, we have examples, like Shadow of the Colossus back there. Like, video games that engross you on an emotional level have arguments to make, have points to make, have characters, like put you in a frame of mind that makes you rethink your own life. Like, I don't understand what else we want from art other than for it to be in a gallery, which Shadow of the Colossus should be.